Okay, hello everyone and welcome to Catalyst Day. We are hearing from student groups who have worked on an applied innovation to try to solve one of the world's many problems. This is a semester-long project. They have worked together. They've worked very hard to do a lot of research. And for today's session right now, we will be hearing about turning up the heat with pyrolysis. So take it away.
Hi everyone, I'm Jordan Bronner.
Hey guys, I'm Mason Leslie.
I'm David Potter.
I'm Mackenzie Schmidt.
I'm Caitlin Von Maren.
And I'm Cassidy Walters.
It's noted that our day-to-day lives have changed a lot since the beginning of the pandemic. Wearing masks, social distancing, and even presenting on Zoom are realities for all of us now. However, because of increased need to prioritize human health and safety, environmental concerns, such as the harms of disposable masks, have fallen to the wayside. Now, of course, waste was already a problem before the pandemic, but COVID-19 has certainly made the issue.
Given the increased use of personal protective equipment from the COVID-19 pandemic and the large variety of this PPE, we are focusing our project more specifically on the standard single-use disposable masks that the general public can purchase from a local store. So research has confirmed that these masks from plastic polymers, of the total mask weight, 73% is polypropylene and 14% is about polyethylene. And so these are two common plastics we see all throughout our common lives. We see they're in bottle caps, crates, luggage, toys, things that we deal with every day for these single-use plastics. And they're also the largest in sales demand and volume. But we are using this plastic composition to design our solution to help find a good process to dispose of these single-use masks, as well as it allows us to attribute some of the environmental issues with these plastics to these masks as well.
Okay, so I'm going to start out with the cause of the problem. So basically our problem is disposable mask waste, and how that came to be was there was an increase in PPE use. You can due to the medical use, so that would be anybody like a doctor, anybody like that, and anyone in the general population. And that led to a large increase in waste. Then you add the precautionary measures put in place, such as the elevated mask use due to the required mask wearing, and we now have a new waste problem that needs to be addressed. We must also factor in the convenience of single-use masks compared to alternative options. So if you look here at the graph for single legs, the amount of waste has increased steadily over time. However, if we look at 2019 to 2020, we can see that that's the biggest jump, and it went from 2.26 to 2.83 million tons of waste, which is the largest increase of medical waste since 2011. So that just by itself shows how large of a negative effect PPE waste has on total medical waste generation. Why should we do anything, or why should we even try and solve this problem? Well, just because waste isn't a new problem, and we should have more sustained efforts to help the issue than we have in the past, especially with how many people it can affect. This problem not only also has the potential to develop into a future problem unless we put more effort towards finding a solution. Even when we look at current waste management systems, they already have an inability to deal with all waste. So then you add in the COVID waste, and the waste systems are on a path of destruction and being overrun and overwhelmed. So I'm going to start out with a little bit of introduction of the importance of the harms and effects that are coming from this issue. So studies show that plastic waste, such as mask waste, could take upwards of 400 years to decompose and break down. So the first thing I'm going to look at here is microplastics and how they play a part in this issue. So when you look at a mask and it breaks down, it never really just goes away. It leaves a trail of microplastics, which are basically small plastics that break down from these masks. And research shows that these microplastics spread through the air once they have broken down the mask. So if there's further mismanagement, such as these masks being improperly disposed, then the particles are only going to continue to spread. So in order to maintain a stable environment that's not disrupted by all this plastic waste, we need to figure out how to properly dispose of them. Now specifically moving to their effect on the environment, Plastic doesn't just break down, it breaks into the smaller pieces, which I talked about earlier, the microplastics. And the majority of these microplastics, consisting of millions of tons, is what we find in our oceans. But you can't just include microplastics, there's also nanoplastics, and they also have to be included in the discussion. They're smaller than microplastics, but they are also negatively impacting the environment. But microplastics don't stop there. They can even reach further, as research shows they can even find their way into the food chain, which brings another problem in itself. When particles like that, microplastics and other plastics, are found in food chain or common food sources, then it raises a major food safety crisis. So microplastics truly have a presence everywhere, even water, for example. The chances that microplastics are in drinking water is upwards of 90%. Study shows, and humans do in most cases, we eat microplastics in small amounts just due to the dust and other particles that are on the food dishes we eat. Mask waste and plastic waste in general also cause many more negative effects, not just towards the environment, but also even towards the general population. So there's major risk for people trying to solve the problem. So when these masks are improperly disposed of, there's many people that come across them, and that is a major risk of spreading COVID-19 to these people. So that could be people who pick up the litter, members of the community that come across it, and even the waste collectors themselves. And this is due to how long COVID-19 can survive on a mask. When the conditions are good, the virus could stay alive and active up to 7 days. Not only that, but these masks being improperly disposed of is a major risk for future potential problems, as research shows that all the improperly disposed masks could even lead to another outbreak, as the plastic particles from the mask can potentially spread pathogens. Mask waste also has negative effects on climate change and food safety, as plastic pollution contributes to climate change due to the carbon emission from the mask, and as a result of that, it poses risks to both. You also have to keep in mind that when most people look at these masks and when they're done with them and use them, the easiest option is just to toss them. Because of that, most of these masks and other sources of pandemic waste end up in the surrounding environment, which would be our oceans and landfills and things of that nature. Not only that, but micro and nanoplastics work as great invisible carriers of numerous dangerous chemicals, such as toxins and even pesticides, as they travel to the ocean. You also have to factor in that plastics in general are a large carrier of chemicals also, and these chemicals are present in everyone's bodies. Research notes the first span of 10 years, there was not one person free of these chemicals when they were tested. So overall, if we look at the problem from the majority, the mask is quickly becoming more and more of a problem, and just the smallest amount of people can make the biggest difference. If just 1% of masks were disposed of improperly, the environment would be flooded with upwards of 10 million masks.
There are a number of companies who have attempted to develop more sustainable alternatives to disposable masks. One French company, for example, manufactured compostable masks made out of hemp and corn. Now, this could help the mask waste issue, assuming enough people who previously used disposable masks made the switch to compostable alternatives. This company sold over 1.5 million masks. However, this doesn't make much dent in the issue. In the United States, more than 100 billion masks are made annually if one person uses one mask per day. Not all Americans will use one disposable mask every day. That many more people would still need to make the switch in order for this solution to be more effective. Moreover, it's difficult to convince people to switch, especially due to the convenience, the portable masks, along with their accessibility and affordability.
Other existing solutions that people and like companies have come up with are cloth masks. Cloth masks, unlike most other masks, can be reused and, if washed properly, can be pretty effective on preventing from spreading of germs. The cloth masks are normally made out of cotton and all sorts of other fabrics similar to cotton. It is recommended that in order to reuse them, they have to be washed either by hand and they have to be hanged up in a dry, and they're also pretty easy to come by as well. During the Manchurian plague in the 1920s, there was an outbreak of influenza. Many doctors actually wore cloth masks because that was like one of the only masks they were able to like use at the time.
Our final existing solution revolves around incineration. This is a very flawed approach that is polluting and extremely harmful to our environment. This is executed through the burning of waste, which can then be converted into electricity, ash, flue gas, as well as heat. As you can see in the picture, a lot of this garbage is piled up in the landfills, which then gets moved into these incinerators, releasing of toxic substances like other air emissions, ash residue, and wastewater, as well as carbon dioxide being released into the environment, creating problems, and which is very detrimental to our health. Based on some pre-pandemic trends, it has been predicted that 12,000 million tons of plastic waste will be piled up in our landfills by 2050. Due to the COVID pandemic now, the use of these single-use plastic masks have only increased, therefore resulting in a lot of this PPE waste to be treated as hazardous, which then needs to go through this thermal and treatment, or in our case, incineration. While this solution appears to be very effective, the COVID-19 pandemic has only worsened our issue at these incineration companies due to the significant growth in this medical waste. So overall, the using of these thermal treatments and incineration to dispose of the PPE waste brings with significant environmental concerns due to the variety of pollutants, which are very detrimental to our health. Thus, why continuing the use of these incinerators are going to be highly ineffective in the years to come.
To avoid some of these environmental consequences of incineration, we are proposing a different chemical reaction known as pyrolysis. So pyrolysis is where we are heating at high temperatures without the presence of oxygen. So it's similar to incineration because we are using a lot of heat. However, incineration uses oxygen, which creates a combustion reaction. We have heat and we have oxygen, and we produce carbon dioxide. But without having oxygen present, we are able to avoid this production of carbon dioxide because we use an inert gas, which is just a gas that won't react with much, so it doesn't create those side products. So a common use is nitrogen. We are proposing to actually use carbon dioxide as our medium for our reaction. So now instead of producing it, we are actually going to use it because carbon dioxide has been found to be not too reactive to produce some other side products we do not want to produce, as well as it also is still unreactive enough, or it reacts enough to help increase our valuable fuel production. The last part of this chemical reaction is a catalyst. We will use a nickel-based catalyst. So what a catalyst is it'll push the reaction forward, increase the reaction rate. And so nickel-based catalysts are known for their ability to cut these carbon-hydrogen bonds, which are main components of these plastic polymers. So the most important part of this is our products. Some of the main products that we will produce include hydrogen, which is a direct source of clean energy. We will also produce methane, which is a main component of natural gas, which is about 30% of the United States energy use, as well as ethylene, which is a main building block of other plastics. So we see one of the plastics that masks are composed of is polyethylene. Ethylene we can use to make more of that. And so along with these, we produce some other valuable fuels, and a lot of these products are clumped into petrochemicals, which are chemicals that we get from oil refining. So now we are creating more of a life cycle. This top pathway in black writing is our typical incineration pathway. We see more of a life chain where we have our plastic, we have our waste, we incinerate it, and we produce carbon dioxide and some electricity and heat. Now we are actually putting it through pyrolysis instead. And so pyrolysis allows us to produce these petrochemicals, which can then be put into either making more plastics or we can even sell them to generate revenue, which is one of our incentives for producing this, for using this solution, is that we can generate revenue from these methane, other gases, as well as we can make more plastics for our own.
So this image shows a very simple representation of what our reactor would look like. So this shows a closed system, which differs from incineration. So how it works is a purge of CO2 enters the reactor with our plastic waste. This undergoes pyrolysis, and the products leave the reactor as a gas. Cold traps cool down the products into liquid products like Mackenzie talked about previously. So the biggest challenge for implementing the solution is the cost of investment for investors. The reactors themselves cost a large amount of money to build and assemble, which is around 4.5 million to about 8.6 million. Other expenses include the supplies needed to set up and maintain the reactors, along with land and a building to house the reactor. It will cost around 102.4 million for supplies and to set up the accessory machines, and around 8 million for land and building production. We would also need organic scientists to make sure the reactors are working properly and to run tests. For one reactor, we would like to have one scientist in the reactor building at all times. In total, we would have 2 to 4 scientists working with the reactor around the clock. Their salary would roughly be around $60,000 per year, though pay varies widely from sources we have seen. We will need to partner with a larger company to afford these costs. We are currently looking into Waste Management Incorporated as a potential partner, along with Apex Landfill located in Clark County, Nevada, which is among the largest operational landfills in the US, along with one of the largest hubs for clean and renewable energy. Theoretically, it would be the easiest place to implement our solution due to the size of the landfill. Both companies' revenues generate per year would be able to pay off the entire project in around 3 to 4 months. Employees are also needed to run and maintain the whole facility. We plan to continue using the employees currently working at Apex for these tasks due to them already being present in the landfill. Some future implementations for our solution are infrared spectrum robots, which will help pick through general garbage on a conveyor belt system to find plastics, and then from there they will be put into the reactor. Also, we plan to implement collection bins similar to recycle and garbage bins we already see in areas of mass high quantities. For example, we could partner with grocery stores, airports, hospitals, and other high traffic areas to mitigate the number of masks that enter the landfills by directly obtaining masks with these bins.
So we would like to close this off by acknowledging the challenges that we would face with this product. The biggest challenge is scalability. This pyrolysis reaction has had a lot of success on a small scale in the lab, but now we have to transition it to an industrial scale. And although we cannot 100% predict the success of this transition, there's enough chemical evidence in a small scale lab that there is a much better, larger practical use for this chemistry. There's actually in Germany, New Energy has partnered with a chemical company known as BASF, and they are signing an agreement to conduct a feasibility study on using pyrolysis for tire waste. So we're already seeing some companies look into the potential of using this reaction for the greater good and using it to deal with some of this waste that we have already produced. One of the things that has slowed this progression is concerns from environmentalists. So there's fears that this will encourage more plastic production. There are current efforts to transition away from single-use plastics. And so they're worried that by having this solution, it's going to encourage more plastic production. And while these are valid concerns, we cannot ignore all the waste that we have already produced. As we saw before, these landfills are getting filled with plastic waste. These wastes are causing a lot of environmental issues like microplastics. And so as much as we would love to derail away from single-use plastics, it's not possible at this time. And especially within the past year, specifically to our masks with the COVID-19 pandemic, there's been such a large production of these single-use masks that we have to do something about it because health was on the forefront. And now we have to deal with all the waste that we produce because of it. So this gives us a solution to deal with this plastic waste, as well as it gives us the opportunity to save some energy from this waste and use it for other processes. So thank you for listening. We are offering now questions.
All right, thank you so very much for your interesting presentation. We are now open for questions. If you have questions, please put them in the chat and we will go through them in sequence. And I actually have a question while we're waiting for other people to put them in the chat. One of the issues with recycling, usually for plastics, is that you never just have a plastic. There's usually some other stuff contaminating the plastic, or it's a mixed material. Is that an issue with pyrolysis? Can you just dump a lot of stuff in there, or what would happen?
So this is something we did come across, which is also one of the reasons why it hasn't been pushed further yet, is because of concerns that can it be valuable for these real life materials where there's so many mixes of varieties of plastics and other polymers. And so that's why we wanted to focus on masks for our first step of this project, because masks, like I said, are mainly composed of about two plastics with some other small materials. So it has been found effective specifically for masks. And so then we are hoping that in the future use, once we perfect it for these masks, we can actually take it further, because there is research coming out recently now looking at, by altering some of the parameters like the heat and the time and the catalyst, we can actually start using it for more mixed plastics. So that's something that we could potentially use for the future.
Okay, cool. We have some questions starting to come in. So the first question asks, are there improving markets for pyrolysis generated hydrocarbons?
Can I ask this
would like
more
to ask
thoroughly?
verbally, because I think there's probably more detail involved. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's clunky to put the whole thing in chat. So,
yeah.
So you're competing. So what you'd like your end product to do is compete with petroleum generated hydrocarbons, basically, right? So is that, this isn't the, I mean, there's pyrolysis for making biofuels and things like that that is used. And I know that on the other end of the, the buyer is often skeptical that these chemicals will work as well as the chemicals they've always gotten to use to make whatever it is they're making. Have those markets improved? Or have you done any research that's shown that there is more use of some of these alternative ways of generating hydrocarbons, from recycled things or from biofuels, where that's going to become more of a reality? Go ahead, maybe BASF has got a way to do it. Go ahead.
So, sorry. So I did look into this a little bit. I did stumble across it looking at some of the fuels that we produce. And there is some research right now on looking at using some of these hydrocarbons that we produce from pyrolysis for, they found one that using it as similar to like a diesel fuel. So they found if it could be used in a diesel engine. So there is an increase in research right now. A lot of that is fairly newer. And seeing, like you said, if this is actually going to be beneficial over this petroleum refining chemicals. And so I think the hope is that we can get some of these fuels back to at least decrease some of our future petroleum refining.
Yeah, I just think some education has to go along with it, because we had the CEO of a biofuel company come and he said, the people on the manufacturing end just are not interested, because we've always used this one supplier. We've always used this, 23 degrees C. We can't use 28. That there's just so much pushback that I almost think some sort of campaign has to go along with it to make it actually happen. But can't solve all the problems, right? But, yeah.
Exactly, one step at a time. Our next question asks, how many times can you reprocess the plastic?
Yes, thank you for that.
Yeah. You showed a nice cycle. And we're wondering, could you go through that forever? Is there a breakdown point?
Yeah, so that's a fair question. I don't know exactly how many times we could actually break this down and for a cycle, but I do know that every time you go through this cycle, you are going to generate some side products like heat and other things. You do slowly lose energy as you go through this cycle, because energy is transferred in a lot of different ways. We see heat's given off, that's energy we're not going to get back. So we will eventually it will decrease. We will lose a little bit with each cycle, but our goal is to at least create more of a cycle and at least get a few uses out of this versus just one and letting these plastics sit in the environment.
I have another question asking what temperature is required for this type of reaction?
Okay, so we are looking at temperatures greater than 500 degrees Celsius. And so around for masks, that seemed to be a pretty effective temperature because we did find a study that looked at just pyrolysis for masks. And then the one thing though is if we did want to take this further to other plastics, the temperature can be altered for more effective for other mixes of materials.
Just out of curiosity, what's the temperature for incineration? Is it similar?
I believe it's just a little bit less than what we would be using.
Okay. Okay.
Relatively similar, though, yes, to answer your question.
Okay. Okay. So we'll take any final questions. And if there are no more further questions, we will thank our group again. And also thank you very much for coming and listening. And just as a reminder, every single session has its own Zoom link. So we will see you on the next Zoom link for the next session. Thank you very much.